The financial crash, the financial crisis, was kind of a big bang event in many people's lives, in global economies. Regulators came in and really said, look, we've been giving you far too much rope. When a lot of the areas where AI can come in will naturally lead to efficiencies, which will mean there will be less people needed within an office. Another recent real sort of drive in the market is around vulnerability of clients. And AI has very much pushed their stock price. They are now at extremely high valuations. There are question marks over to what extent can they monetize the spend that they've done on AI. Things like the DeepSeek moment, is that the bubble burst?
Hello, Ed. Ed Webster. Plurimi Wealth.
Correct. Yes.
Good to have you here.
Thank you.
So let's kick off. Give me an idea of who you are and what you do.
Perfect. So as you say, I'm Ed Webster. I am a relationship manager, wealth manager for Plurimi Wealth. So I've been working in the wealth management, private banking business throughout nearly my full career, a little bit at the start working in investment banking, but for now probably 18 years or so I've been in wealth management, working across a range of started working for a very large American bank, and then briefly worked for a large Israeli bank, and now work for a boutique wealth management where we're based in London with offices in Monaco and Dubai.
The risk and reward, risk appetite, and then the objectives that you've got. So you're representing your clients, and then efficiency.
Yeah.
So the adoption of technology, I would imagine, and from the relationships that we have, has helped a huge amount with understanding what information is available, what the decision-making process is, and the compliance side, understanding that you don't do anything a bit naughty or a bit silly.
Yeah.
Perhaps. Give us a view on compliance from your experience.
Yeah. So I think the primary goal, I think, around compliance in the industry now is to make sure that the underlying client knows and understands what risks they are taking on and what they have invested in. So coming back to the financial crisis, you had a number of sophisticated products that had been missold to individuals who simply didn't understand what they were invested in. And so I think primary sort of goal is to make sure that the underlying client understands what they've invested in, what risks they are sitting on, that what we are doing, what the portfolios that we are putting together for our clients are meeting their risk tolerances, their risk budget, if you will. And obviously we will do that. And it may be a changing scale that changes over time, where when you first meet someone, they may say, look, I have very little risk tolerance. And then hopefully we've achieved some good gains. And then that risk tolerance might sort of grow a little bit, where they say, look, I'm willing to take on a little bit more risk to try and grow. Or life situation might have changed. And a lot of compliance is around that, is also making sure that we're sticking to the agreed risk tolerances, but that we're continuing to monitor that. So we're continuing to monitor life-changing events for people. So has someone got divorced? And so in which case are we looking at a lot less money? On the flip side, have they started to earn a lot more money? Has there been has there been a large injection of money into their lives from whatever that might be? And so in which case has that changed their overall objectives? So it's a constantly sort of changing, fluid situation, which it should be. And I think, again, that's another change that has come in more recently, that it wasn't a case of, well, we opened this account 20 years ago, you said you were high risk and that's what we've always had you as, and so that's fine. It's a case of, well, no, things change, so that person might have been a young person when they first came in with a little bit of money and said, yeah, I'm high risk, but now they're married with children and they've got more dependence upon them, and so in which case that risk has changed, or they're beginning to look towards retirement and or possibly even end of life, and then in which case again that risk tolerance drops down. But it's something which I think we now understand to be constantly changing for all clients, and so
that's quite a lot of intelligence that you're constantly gathering.
Yeah.
So if we remove the word wealth management and looked at it as human management, then it begins to make sense where the relationship is so important, where trust comes into play. Because I suppose compliance is ensuring a level of trust.
Yeah.
But then that compliance needs monitoring, but you've got to know your client. I mean, the term KYC and AML, in any business or any group activity, even, the better that you understand the body language, the people, their characters, their personalities, the better you can understand. Obviously, we're talking in general on these podcasts about AI.
Yeah.
And there's always a perceived risk and there's a perceived opportunity.
Yeah.
Where do you see both the positive and the negative if you were to apply, or maybe you already do apply AI within the contextual categories we've kind of laid out so far in this conversation?
So it is beginning to come into the industry, and it is something which I see as having a huge potential to change the way the industry operates, to really sort of free up time elsewhere. I suppose the first sort of real point that kind of springs to mind for me is around the idea of KYC, know your client, around the questions we ask is, and this I think would still be the case with any AI that is then utilized around that, is it's only going to be as good as the data that's fed into it. So if you have a bad actor who does have something in their past or in around their sort of wealth creation that is wrong, for want of a better way of putting it, if they're not going, if they're not going to be upfront about it, if they're not going to tell us, if they're not going to lead us down that route, and it is not sort of visible or possible for us to find it, then the reality is it can exist without us knowing it. So that's kind of taking the very negative view. But on the more positive side, if we're not told about the full picture, so if we're not made aware, so for instance, certain questions that we will ask people are, to get a full list, a full idea of what their overall wealth position is, how much is their home worth if they own a home? Do they have a mortgage on it? How much is that mortgage? What do they earn on an average day? And it can seem very invasive, these sort of kind of questions. But if we don't build that picture, then we can't give the best sort of advice, the most suitable advice to clients. Because if it is someone for whom just for ease of numbers, let's say their sort of net asset position outside of their house is, let's say, £1 million, a lot of money, but equally at the same time they maybe have sort of fairly low earnings, then that would sort of tell us that actually you really shouldn't be taking too much risk. You shouldn't be, if you decide that the current sort of hot stock of the day.
Well, this comes to a really interesting angle. So the idea of gambling.
Yeah.
And it's arguable, is it a logical, rational decision? Or is it gambling?
Yeah.
And that often comes to the context of, well, what information is available to you? What's the historical context behind it? And what are the circumstances and the probability of a direction occurring? And what are the things historically that have completely squashed a particular situation?
Yeah.
And from an AI sense, I mean, I had a huge amounts of calls from people asking, and we had discussed it, Professor Song and I had discussed the DeepSeek situation.
Yes.
And well, DeepSeek, generally the idea and the belief was that AI requires almost an unlimited amount of GPUs from NVIDIA.
Yes.
And then DeepSeek proved that's not necessarily the case. And we saw NVIDIA's share slide. I mean, they may have bounced back. But again, the short term, or the long term, the medium term, what information was available? All the information available was very clearly the stock's going to go up. A trumpet with, I think, Larry Ellison and Sam Altman discussed or mentioned 500 billion infrastructure around data centers and GPUs. So logically, on the surface, it appeared one particular way.
Yeah.
But if you zoom out further and look at the rate of innovation of technology, and you look at the cost and the power of microchips, they've only gone one way. People always use the analogy of the Apollo spacecraft.
Sure.
And the first moon landing, and the computing power will have infinitely more than that on our mobile phones and probably even on an Apple Watch.
Yeah.
So was it an unexpected circumstance, or was it the psychological condition of human beings being predetermined and predisposed to positive outcomes until proven otherwise? Now, I'm sure from a human perspective, you're dealing with all sorts of people that are saying, this is what we want to be in, caught up in the bubble of the hype.
Yeah.
And it kind of makes sense without really looking at all the information and realizing, yes, there is a demand and there is a need, but the probability of the further time goes on of effectively large language models and other forms of deep AI requiring such power, no. The requirements always go down in technology and the cost comes down.
Yes.
So once proven, that completely changed everyone's thought. How were you dealing with people? What was that like in a general sense, as actually having relationships with humans pre, during, and after?
So I think in the first instance, say, almost unavoidably, every client that we deal with was exposed to that story in varying degrees. Coming back to what I was saying before, certain clients had really probably over budgeted towards NVIDIA. Might as well, rather than talk about it as that very much became the sort of stock to chase, due to, and again, it shouldn't sort of be avoided or kind of looked at, ignored, but due to just the phenomenal growth that they'd seen. And I think sometimes that those two things can slightly be confused, is how a company performs versus how their share price performs. And, the reality is, even now, NVIDIA is a mind-blowingly successful and still growing company, even with everything that you've just mentioned. However, occasionally a share price can take on a life of its own. And I think that's the reality, and that's what we try to look at, what we try to sort of understand and say, look, has this got really sort of too far out of control? And we will always come up against, not come up against, but really sort of have discussions with clients where it is still where it is a risk that they're willing to take, versus others where when we put the explanation to them that this share price has gone a very long way, and perhaps has disconnected from the fundamentals of the company itself to an extent, they will say, yeah, fine, I think we should start to trim that position, through to those clients that say, no, I'm still very much comfortable with that. To give, I think for us, we see as the ongoing reality is that valuations of companies will always matter, when looked at against their share prices. And there is a reversion to the mean that at certain times seems incredibly unlikely. When Apple or Amazon or Google or NVIDIA are riding high, there is always a justification for why they're trading at such high valuations. But their long-term average valuation, the market will always find them back at some point.
Because a metric which I think is important for people to understand is a share price is effectively the common belief, an empirical value of people, that more people are buying and they're investing, and therefore the price goes up. And if the appetite is there, they buy more and the value goes up. And when people lose confidence, so the valuation of a company is effectively measured by the confidence in the story.
Yeah.
And the story itself, there's the traditional method of saying, well, how do we say what it should be worth?
Yeah.
What's the revenues? What's the profitability? What's the total addressable market? What's the growth potential?
Absolutely.
And it tends to be, one, which I think is an extremely good company, but took a hit recently, Palantir.
Yes.
Has had incredible growth. In our opinion, they're delivering something of value in comparison to other companies using AI, where there's a lot of value, but the risk is extremely disproportionate. The cost is disproportionate. The growth trajectory, there are a lot of questionable elements, but that takes a step to the next point, which is one assumes you're informed, because confidence comes from, do I believe you? Well, belief is based on the information available.
Yeah.
So if you're not really fully informed, the last podcast we talked about the Dunning-Kruger effect, and I don't think it's a personal aspect, but the logic is people feel like they know more than they do.
Yes.
But the reality is the absolute vast amount of knowledge that would really be needed to understand and come to a rational conclusion, you probably would find these elements. But then from a trader standpoint, which is not necessarily directly what you guys are, but from a trader perspective, it's about short-term gains. What can I make today? Maybe long-term trader, you can say, I'm happy for it to go up and down because I believe over the next 5 years it will go up higher. So that's more in the appetite of maybe a pension fund. So just breaking it down, it comes back to, how is it possible for 1, 2, or 3, or 4, or 5, or even 10 humans to be absorbing in real time a decadal context of information and to know everything that there is that could impact a company and the financial reports and everything coming in.
Put very simply, it isn't. And I think that is that is another area where AI has already shown itself to be a incredibly useful and even sort of central tool to a lot of portfolio management, investment decisions, and stock picking, for want of a better way of putting it. And that is the ability that an AI machine, an AI driver, can process thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of data points, data sets at any given time with an update rate that is far greater than you or I relentlessly refreshing our Google search on, the news stream on something, whilst also looking at the real-time economic data that's coming through, how that will then affect that. Absolutely impossible for 10 human beings to do. Thousands of human beings, but even then, they would have to be relentlessly connected to each other and constantly conversing with each other in a way that the AI can do.
So really, it's a problem of scale.
Yes.
I mean, the way that we've looked at things at GAEA and the large geotemporal model, again, some people won't understand the context without looking at where is there a need?
Yeah.
Where is something suddenly unachievable because of scale?
Yeah.
And if you can observe, and this is the basis of what we do and why we do it,
Yeah.
is massive amounts of common sense of observing one element, another element, and another element, but then understanding how does that change the outcome? And again, what's good look like? Well, if you're a long trader or a short trader, as in you're betting on it increasing value or decreasing in value,
Yes.
is completely different. So the context of in whose interest, obviously, there's a whole chain of people, but also like a recipe.
Yeah.
You can have everything and say, well, I'll just introduce this one little thing. Jalapeno peppers, for example, that could dramatically change the taste of everything. So it's not necessarily even a case of observing everything and coming to the same conclusion. It's looking historically and saying, what has the reaction been when that happened?
Yeah.
And to begin to assess, I mean, that is a huge amount of research to be undertaken. And if you're talking about a lot of stocks,
Yes.
that's a massive problem. But there are multiple problems there. And then, of course, if you can't understand the thinking behind it, then you go back to the compliance.
Yes.
Because are you following the steps? I think it would be fascinating for everyone to hear what is the regulations around how you reach conclusions.
So we have to, so the compliance and the regulated demands that the conclusions that we reach should be on an individual client by client basis. So it has to be shown that whatever decision we make, we have thought about the suitability for that individual client. So again, this comes back to, and everything around the industry is relatively circular. We will, we keep coming back to the same sort of thoughts and themes. And
just to interject quickly, what that means is the same decision with 10 people could lead to 10 different outcomes because their circumstances are all different.
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly right. And potentially, for same but equally same outcome might have come through from slightly different sort of inputs for different reasons. But yes, what we have to show is essentially that any individual decision that we take that we have thought about how that is suitable for our for the individual client. So it boils back down to their risk return outlook, how much risk they're willing to take, what their aims and objectives are. Come back something incredibly basic on that, which is at the center of it. Are they people who are focused on making income or capital gains? That can be something. So, again, your decisions that you make around that have to link back to that in some way. In saying, if it's a client who is particularly focused on generating income, is it right to buy gold for them?
And what happens if it's a black box technology? For example, in AI, transformer-based technology, which goes back to large language models again. There's the inputs, lots of stuff happens, here's an output, which may or may not be accurate. It's probably plausible, but you don't know why. What impact does black box technology have in your industry?
So what we have, so I can talk to my personal sort of experiences around this. So we have a proprietary tool around an AI system, which essentially gives us a ranking on stocks. And so that will give us a score around a stock, why it likes it, why it potentially doesn't like it anymore, why it outright dislikes it. And it will give us a range of scores. So we can see how it's reached that view that it likes it or doesn't like it. The further digging into how it's reached those scores, we don't sort of have a lot of data on that. So what you will end up with is, as a human overlay, is essentially then bringing that back to those fundamentals of, is it is this a suitable move for this client? So just because the AI has essentially decided we like this stock, again, if it is a stock that, let's say, doesn't pay any dividends, but the underlying client has stated that they are very income focused, you have to really look at that and say, so how does that really fit what they want? So I guess linking that back is always really important, and that would be where that human overlay comes in to say, no, we don't necessarily just blindly follow whatever the AI system tells us. But I think we can see that there is a move within the industry that is heading that way. But one of the great concerns around that is, within the black box, how are those decisions being reached, and is it still being concerned about the primary point, the coming back to those initial views and objectives of the client, and is it also thinking, coming from a view that those initial thoughts and views of the client are always changing as well? So
I think it goes back to, again, a point Professor Songwood said, but something we're very passionate about. Is AI controlling you, or are you controlling the AI?
Yeah.
Where's the value? Are you hoping to get value because it could do something which potentially leads you to walk blind or half the job? Here's the conclusions, just do as you're told. But you don't actually know why.
Yeah.
And it's all fine until something goes wrong. And there are catastrophic situations we've all seen over the last century, where usually something absolutely catastrophic happens, but it's a very thin vein of activity where it's actually a lot of people in their siloed decision-making process. And if you looked at any one siloed function, it was probably the right decision.
Yeah.
And you, I can't see anything wrong with that. Added up together, catastrophic consequence.
Yes.
So I think to take into consideration the value of a human, there is a human element from the relationship to reading confidence. There are so many signals which humans understand, even body language,
Yeah.
mood, tone, ambition, appetite, that it's like reading the room.
Yeah.
You read the room and you have an understanding of what's going on, what the mood is. I often think if you turn up completely drunk 4 hours late after your partner's cooked dinner and you're not particularly nice,
Yeah.
well, you read the room, what sort of reaction, because you've created the circumstances, especially on an anniversary, for example. But if you turn up on time, you've done something, you've brought flowers, you can read the room, and the reaction is probabilistically very different.
Yes.
It sounds very obvious, but there are probably millions and millions of these moments occurring in a sequential basis that we're absorbing all of the time.
Yeah.
I think the AI best interpretation of that would be a self-driving car. Lots of signal inputs. It's got a destination has been pre-programmed, and it's assessing everything and is making iterative adjustments on the brakes, on the acceleration, on the steering.
Yeah.
But even still, compared to a human, that is a minuscule. This is something we do. Sometimes we'll drive our own cars and we'll be on autopilot, so to speak. It's an incredible function to do.
Yeah.
But that doesn't understand humour, personality, context across the board. Now, if AI can be used, so well, where can it create scale or deliver on scale for all of these things, which as a human we're relatively limited because of the world of physics, time and space, but bring your expertise, experience to deliver what you understand, and you're driven for what is considered a good outcome for a client. And this goes across any business.
Yeah.
I mean, we deal with a range of companies, from luxury through to selling food and beverage.
Yeah.
If you look all across that, there are many decisions, there's an outcome that's described, and everything that happens to influence the outcome tends to happen in the world all around us.
Yeah.
Not within the world within. So if you can have something which is observing all around, that has your predetermined view of context, plus all the things that you're not aware of, then suddenly AI can be phenomenal.
Yeah.
But assuming it is one thing and applying it across the board, and if you can't reach a conclusion, or you don't know why it's reached conclusions, and it's not aware of all these things that you're probably not even aware you're considering, because you're you.
Yeah.
Every decision, every moment is based upon this entire long trajectory of experiences that you've had.
Yes.
Knowing the mood of the client, what their needs are, everything. I just think it's near impossible to describe everything to the level that needs to happen to replace a human in that context. And as a human, would you necessarily trust technology over someone in front of you? Because when something potentially bad does happen, do they pick the phone up? We have it in music where people think, oh, AI is going to take over music. It will aid it, it will help it, it will create a lot of things. But where's the AI that's going to get up on stage, tour the world,
Sure.
that people will fall in love with because they love their personality and that they dress with a style that they really like? Well, it's not that.
Yeah.
So I think people are conflating and amplifying 10% of what can be absolutely critical value as if it's 90% of what's in front of them. When any conversation and rational thinking, you can begin to come to the conclusion, oh, I hadn't thought of that, I hadn't thought of that, I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah.
You know, you're not going to have the Yeezys by Kanye with the Adidas deal. AI is not necessarily going to do that because, well, he's a very controversial figure now, but even if you look at that whole trajectory, or any entertainer, sports star, there's a tangible thing people fall in love with, and that's the human element. That's where the trust in the brand goes to.
Yeah.
So what you're doing is probably far more similar to what most people actually experience and are engaged with every day, they're not.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I think what's interesting is I try to take a fairly sort of neutral viewpoint on how AI can be used across our industry and across the world, I think in general, but being specific on our industry, because I think there are some people who are very averse to it. I think part of that, I personally feel, stems from a view of wanting to sort of protect the kind of the human workforce, really, to be perfectly honest. I mean, I think because a lot of what we're talking about, a lot of the areas where AI can come in will naturally lead to efficiencies, which will mean there will be less people needed within an office. I mean, maybe the actual oversight of the AI then adds to needing people in other sorts of jobs, but I think realistically you are looking at less. So I think there's a resistance, and a lot of that I think is born from that sort of protection of the the human side, the human input into the industry, through to the other side of the spectrum where people are very keen to say, this AI is excellent. It will be able to do everything. It can do it better than us. It can. So let's go. Let's roll it out. And as I say, I try to take a fairly sort of neutral view on it, a sort of central view. But I think what where you were sort of saying around the kind of the black box and around how those human kind of inputs are really important. I think one also can't forget that humans are also susceptible to so behavioural finance is a really sort of large part of what we have to sort of almost guard ourselves from, is that we are unconsciously pushed in so many directions without realising it, and so as an example, and it's so prevalent right now, I think, especially with the sort of political situation around the world, and that it is, just relentlessly changing on literally a sort of an hour by hour basis, is being really careful about sort of what opinion you're listening to, where you're taking it from. And so I think, confirmation bias is a really sort of big one for me. So I have certain clients where I actively will send them research which I know disagrees with their viewpoint, because otherwise all they will do is just listen to the same thing telling them what they already think. And that is where your hope is that a machine won't view that way.
You've just described YouTube.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Exactly. The algorithm. Exactly. And I think, so coming back to your point of saying in a self-driving car, where a machine can't replicate human sort of inputs.
Instinct.
But at the same time, a machine doesn't still have the argument that it had with its wife playing over in its head. The machine doesn't have the children in the back of the car, really annoying them and sort of distracting them from what they're trying to do. The machine isn't running late for a meeting. Not sure if I should be sort of saying this, but on a speed awareness course I was on once, but they said that the main reason people speed is because they're running late. It sounds really obvious, but immediately your ability driving diminishes because you're rushed, you're stressed, you're pushing, and you forget everything that's important. And that's why you then speed, and that's why you then drive really poorly, whereas a machine isn't. So I know exactly what you mean, but that's where I sort of try to take that sort of fairly central viewpoint that...
Well, I think it's just rational, though.
Yeah.
I mean, this is part of the conversation in the general public domain, and all of the AI professors, experts in their respective fields all agree as well. If you're going to listen to a particular organization, of which there are a handful, which are on a massive grab for market share, that this is how it's going to be, this is how the narrative is, this is what's required, don't bother trying it yourself because it's unaffordable, unachievable, we're the only people that can do it, and this is how it works. Well, we know for a fact that it's been demonstrated and it will come out to the world that that is not the case. Even what we're doing, we've been working on for a decade.
Yeah.
And we know as a fact there are abilities which are rational, incredible complexity, but you can come up with trusted, rational outcomes which significantly move the needle.
Yeah.
But the mass populace are far more influenced by the majority of what they see, which is do this because I want you to do that because there's something in it for me and we're trying to grab market share.
Yeah.
So the current understanding of AI, you would imagine, is one thing and the reality is something else. Not to take away from actual abilities, but it's what's not being said.
Yes.
That is interesting. And if AI is very much dependent on what is being said, even from a simple, rational, common sense standpoint. For example, if you wanted to find out how to track a tornado in the context of risk, well, a tornado is, according to an old friend who's a NASA scientist, an electrical event.
Right.
So he considered it creates a plasma which has a resonance. So it's in effect an electrical event in some form, which is why lights can turn on, whether it will take out the power network, but lights will turn on when the tornado comes over.
Right.
Very peculiar to see. I mean, people can research away.
Sure, yeah.
There's a whole science to it. So if the technology typically requires information to be fed, but the communications network is gone, the power networks have gone, so you have no form of visualizing. And if you're going to use satellite photography, well, you're looking at a cloud.
Yeah.
So that's not necessarily the case. That means it's only eyewitnesses with no form of communication. So effectively, you look at the absence of information because you can see everything turned on. Then you look, turned off, turned off, turned off, turned off, and you begin to see the speed and you see the trajectory, which means you can begin to calculate, do you have any assets of interest in this particular trajectory?
Sure.
And he had invented some technology that understood and could listen to the resonance, detect it 30 miles out, and the power of that resonance, the frequency, could be recorded. So you could literally observe it with all infrastructure turned off independently to begin to see it. And at least outside of that grid where the infrastructure hadn't been damaged. So there were two ways to then detect it. That was obviously moving to there is information.
Yeah.
But the concept was even without that, you can begin to reasonably accurately find out information through no information.
Yeah.
So how much of what we do is that? If you get home and somebody's not there, but you're expecting them to be there, then the absence of them being there is information.
Yes.
So if you turn up and someone's late, hence driving and speeding tickets, again, you don't want to be the guy that's late. These are all calculations, and we can all instinctively understand what that means.
Yeah.
And that's a completely different approach. Apply that to every business, wealth management, the context of everything. And there is the potential for a game changer as a kind of integrated relationship with humans. So I think humans' value will go up in many, 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 many different walks of life.
Yes.
It will create an entire new world of value that can work in partnership and almost be like putting on the Iron Man suit, rather than saying the Iron Man suit alone is the value.
Yes. Yeah.
It's the enhancement of the individual and that scale capability, but still with the instinct of the human.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that is, tying that back to what we were saying, I think that's exactly the sort of the hope of the outcome of where it's taking us within my industry, is that you have that, you have the investment decisions are aided by a far better information gathering and processing tool, but essentially still someone is there to make sure that the safeguards are there, to make sure that that this is still correctly applied to the individual situation, the individual client that they need to. I think also around the something that we talked about right at the start, around the repetitive administrative tasks that can be fulfilled by AI, which then frees up the human to really sort of focus on the more, not necessarily important things, but really, something that's more driven by that's more necessitated to human interaction. So, the things which are actually, so more time to go and meet a client, and as you said, it's the nuances as well that you can only you can only really find from a human. So again, if it is that case of another recent real sort of drive in the market is around vulnerability of clients. So are they vulnerable in any ways? And there are certain ways where it's very black and white. Their age, their sort of family situation, recently bereaved or recently divorced, or any of those kind of moments. But then there's also a more sort of grey area part of it, which is you as the relationship manager, how do you ascertain this person to be vulnerable in any way? And so that again is something which only can really be done with human interaction, with, as you say, the kind of the nuances of kind of interaction, of picking something up, of picking up maybe little triggers in conversation and things like that, and I think all of that leads to a better outcome. And so again, that's something where AI probably assists that to happen, because in a really simple case, you freed up more time for the human being, the human RM to do that part of their job.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So I'm thinking, given what you do and the nature of dealing with clients and understanding what they're interested in and how they're influenced by everything going on, what are the most interesting stocks or requests or ideas or demand for investment in and around the AI space from a more financial perspective?
Yes. So, and do you mean right now?
Yeah. And over the last 3 to 6 months up to now.
Yeah. So even within that time, it feels like the world is sort of slightly flipped on its head because of one fairly large sort of political sort of change that's happened over in the States. And I think that, so at the moment, I think we're seeing a huge focus on defence stocks, somewhat depressingly, but that is that there is a huge surge in defence spending, and so the stocks around defence, and especially into the technology around defence. So you mentioned it earlier, but Palantir is a really interesting stock around there. Even there are different sides to it. So where the US have said that they're going to cut their defence budget, they're aiming to cut it, I believe, by 8% over the course of it. And so Palantir is one of the major recipients of defence contracts. Their stock's sold off, but nevertheless, we still see it as one of the at the forefront of AI within defence on that side as well, which is a large part of their business. So companies around that, there's a UK company, Kinetic, which is involved around that area as well. Really interesting. So that's one sector, I think, which, as I say, for slightly depressing reasons, but is pretty hot at the moment, and we feel probably still does have further to run. I mean, it has gone a long way. Coming back though, you say over sort of 3-6 months or so, the Magnificent Seven, which I'll now probably forget one of them, but is Nvidia, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Tesla, and Meta, or Facebook as was, are, have been the hottest stocks for 2 years now. And I think the difference there is that and all, again, as you know, are all very much at the forefront of AI, and AI has very much pushed their stock price and has sort of pushed them to the very sort of pinnacle of stock markets. But the trouble is that they are now at extremely high valuations. There are question marks over to what extent can they monetize the spend that they've done on AI. Does this still have further to go, or have they reached a point where that spending, things like the DeepSeek moment, is that the bubble burst on that? Is that a case of saying it's that actually, we can do this at a far cheaper price, and so these companies have essentially wasted money on this?
But does that just also open up the trajectory of AI with lots of opportunity of newer companies is potentially extreme in the context that the ones that you're talking about have led to a belief system where the costs are astronomical. That's what they've borne. That's what people invested in. But that belief system has changed. So it's not necessarily an AI issue. It's the big Magnificent Seven, as you said.
Yes. Yeah. I would. I would definitely agree with that. I think that that kind of democratization of the area of AI, that as a kick on from the sort of the DeepSeek revelation, is probably a huge benefit to a number of other places. But as for the stocks where nearly all investment had funneled into, so I checked this just before coming on, so it was still sort of up to date. But so the top 10 stocks in the S&P 500, so the big sort of broad-based US index, so that would capture all 7 of those Magnificent Seven and several others, Broadcom and I think a couple of others. But they made up 38% of the entire 500 stock index, 38% by market cap, by the size of their the relative companies. And so what you're essentially looking at is 2% of companies make up 38% of the overall index. The normal running average across history is 20%. So you can see that it's still high. So large companies will always obviously take up a larger proportion of the overall. But what we'd got to was something that was way beyond anything we'd seen before. So at roughly 40%, 2/5 by 2% of the companies in the index. So
that's quite fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean, the idea that a handful of companies have taken over a huge amount of, and I'm kind of thinking this through, but it's more than just that. It's what it represents that they now control. Because if you think every company, well, every person in the world, their bank will be using their one of these as infrastructure. So will supermarkets. There's not a place it doesn't touch. I heard a talk on, I forget the chap's name, I believe a Greek name, and he was saying the idea of real estate is now digital real estate.
Right. Yeah.
So a very tiny proportion of people, we are all renting real estate from a very small number of companies, where it used to be land. So it's the digital landowners.
Yes.
So it makes sense that this tiny microcosm, from a percentage perspective, has such dominance. Because this is where everything now lives.
Yeah. And I think, and so, yeah, and that I think comes back to the positives of that of that deep seek moment, of that sort of realization that potentially this could actually grow far wider. And so what we have started to see so far this year is a little bit, it's still got a long way to go, and it is still way beyond long-term averages, but a little bit of a pull back from those Magnificent Seven, top 10 stocks, and the rest of the market is starting to catch up slightly. The other big factor here as well is we, as a market, as an industry, have become incredibly US focused, and what we've seen, and hopefully this is I think a wave that continues, but that actually Europe is very much sort of starting to show better performance so far this year. That there is a return of investment into Europe. There's a return of investment into China. There's so you are starting to see that broadening out a little bit beyond just the US, and almost more frighteningly just 7 stocks.
So it does give context to the idea of democratization, in the sense that with a much lower cost entry, with everybody being part of effectively the AI arms race, there's a capital available worldwide because everyone's realizing they can do it, they need to do it, they need to get involved, they are getting involved. So effectively it's growing economies across the world. And because there is this inherent competition from an international and geopolitical basis, it's only going to drive more.
Yeah.
And by being democratized, not necessarily in the level of concentration into the Magnificent Seven that we're seeing more recently.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's exactly it. And I think that can only be a good thing, I think, for markets, for investment, and then by extension, I think for a lot of people who potentially view this as something that exists over there and isn't necessarily of interest to them, but it should be, because it
touches everything.
It touches everything, exactly.
Every single sector, every business, and every walk of life, from a personal level all the way through to a very, very large enterprise level, is all being touched. And the construct, I think it was Steve Jobs who said something along the lines of, a company is just a group of individuals with a common goal. Yeah. On different scales. But if it's all getting changed, then it can, there could be terrible things.
Yeah.
But in the main, the more it's democratized, the more individuals can leverage the power of it rather than only a handful, then that will be applied to every sector. We're going to have some sports stars on here soon. But from sport to entertainment to banking to retail, everything you can imagine.
Yes.
Even agriculture, everything touched at some point. And if that can be democratized, that's only going to create wealth for a lot more people, and not just a few.
Yeah.
I'm sure there will be a few that do very, very well, but the opportunity's there for everyone. The potential for opportunity is there. Yeah. So it spans everything. It's very much not black or white. It's all grey area. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it comes back to, I think, again, those efficiencies, and so then the potential to kind of really kind of free up time, I think, again, is, that's the other sort of huge factor, is just where AI can essentially assist humans. Because I think, there is so much discourse that's negative around AI and the potential impact it has, but there is also that very positive side to it. And again, not to get sort of too high-minded about what the technology, but just, I think, on the very simple level of the greater efficiency it can do really mundane tasks for individuals, which then frees up more time, which obviously, I think is generally seen to be a good thing. I mean, you know.
Well, there's two sides to that, I think, or two parts, not sides. One, efficiency. And I'm always cautious around efficiency, but of course, elements of efficiency undoubtedly and obviously are good.
Yeah.
But I think it's the creativity.
Yes.
Because everything that is created, leading to jobs, ideas, innovation, the more that people can create, then the better the outcomes for everybody. And that's where we see the incredible opportunity to then apply that into our everyday lives, with that as the focus, with the upside of efficiency, rather than the focus of efficiency.
Yeah.
So
no, I would agree with that, definitely. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I think on that note, Ed, we'll wrap
Perfect.
up. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, it certainly has. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great.